Hey everybody, Johnny B. Good here. Hello and good evening greetings from Chillicothe, Ohio. Once again, today it is September 22nd, Sunday, 2019. Local time it is 8:20. Temperature is 75 degrees. Grace and I are continuing our journey to Madison, Wisconsin. What happened to my GPS here? I guess I better hold on. Kind of somewhat I get this question all the time. The GPS is a Rand McNally Overdrive 8 Pro. The camera I am using right now is a Sony HDR AS300. The description or the link of the camera is on the description below. What else? Current odometer is 129,351. Someone earlier asked me approximately how many miles do I have under my belt. I honestly can't tell you. But I can tell you this, I've been driving since 1991. And I average about 150,000 miles a year. But get this, from 1991 to about 2000, I think I've only worked like 8-9 months out of the year. But since 2000, I have been at it solid, full time. From 1991 to about 2000, my father was still alive, and I refused to grow up. I mooched, kind of worked with my dad, not. My dad was not the kind that would give you cash, but if you hang around the house, you had to do chores and fix up things and basically his helper at his shop doing odd things. As I mentioned many times, that my dad was a very, very wealthy person, but he was not the flashy kind. He was very cheap on his money. He didn't buy fancy clothes. He didn't wear expensive watches or any watch. He didn't wear coat and tie. He was a grease monkey. Well, that's where most of his money went. He bought very expensive tools and odds and ends and projects or whatever, keep himself busy. So it pretty much helped him with that, He once bought a brand new fishing boat that was let me see if I can remember the brand. It was a Lund fishing boat, okay, brand spanking new. And he had me strip that down, all the way down to its nothing. I mean, it was just he had me rip all the floors, all the carpet on the floors, and all the plywoods, and underneath the plywoods were the foam, and the foam was a little bit soggy with water, so he had me strip that thing down to the bare bones, and oh man, I tell you, that my dad would buy something brand new like that and strip it. I mean, just but that that got him busy. That got him occupied. So yeah, that was his hobby, I suppose. So when my dad died in 2001, I think it was, and that's when the financing support died. So little Johnny B. Good had to grow up really fast, and that's when I became a full-time truck driver. So to answer the question is how many miles do I have experience total? I don't know. I hate to tell you even a guess figure, because it would never be accurate. It would never even come close to being accurate. And to me, you know what? It doesn't really matter how many miles I got. All I know is I drove yesterday and made it here without a snag, and that's all it counts. Anyway, I'd like to tell you about a little kid back in Camiguin Island and the barrio of Leong Ginsilipan, Camiguin, or jokingly as what we call our barrio, because it's spelled L-I-O-N-G, L-I-O-N-G, and it doesn't really sound, doesn't sound special enough, so we always joke around that we call it the Lion G. At least it gives it a little bit of a class to it. So in the barrio of the Lion G, back when, I don't know, this would have to be about 1974, when I was I could probably imagine 4th grade, 3rd grade, very, very young age. I befriended a local kid by the name of Solito Aban. And as I mentioned many times, I have grown up, I lived in a very, very well modern type of house compared to the native house. We had running water, electricity, plumbing, indoor bathrooms, while everybody else in the barrio was dark and still had the outhouses and no plumbing and all that stuff. And so basically, when I was out of my house, I was with and was one with the local kids. I played with them, I acted, talked like them. But when it got, when it started to get dark, then I would go home, and my house would be all bright with fluorescent tubes and You could see our house from across the channel. That's how bright our house was. So again, as I said, even though the barrio was all native, I lived in a very modern, house. We had our own refrigerator, and so I kind of grew up in both worlds, I suppose. And I would bring my friends to the house, and I would open up the refrigerator and I would give them food and show them all kinds of what electricity was. Most of the kids never saw what an electric was. So what I'm trying to say is I was immersed in that culture. And anyway, growing up there, I also went to school at a local public school, and believe me, this public school was not something to brag about, and certainly you didn't really learn much. I mean, you could probably tell. One of the things that kind of screwed up the school was it's not too far away from the beach, and every day there would be somebody out there in the beach acting as like a lookout. Whenever the fish would jump and spool together, and they would do all that commotion thing on the water in the ocean, somebody would ring a really loud bamboo bell, and when that bell rang, half the class would disappear. Everybody would run and go fishing. Instead of carrying notebooks and books, we carried goggles and to go fishing. And it was a very acceptable practice in school. I mean, who can deny going out in the ocean, get fresh fish and bring it home? So anyway, this is a story where I'm gonna tell you, it begins to where I call one of my biggest gut-wrenching, biggest mistake, regret, and shame of my life. I have been hurt with other people, and but the biggest pain in my life has always been somewhat of my own doing. And this is a story where I don't like to remember it, but once in a while it pops up and reminds me the horrible things in the past. But it also reminds me of the amazing grace the Lord has. So here it goes. My best friend, Solito, we call him Luloy, had an older brother that was born with a birth defect. I don't know what you call them in English, but it's the kids that are born with a cut upper lip. And to make you understand about that birth defect, there are many different kinds of cut lip. Some kids are born with just that, a very, a cut lip, and that's it. But it gets worse for some kids, because in other kids, especially the worst ones, their upper jaw, upper teeth, and that the top of your tongue, part of your mouth there, is not fully developed. So even back then, it was a very easy fix. That the procedure already existed long before my generation. But it wasn't always available in the island, in the whole entire island. It wasn't available. And so anyway, Solito's brother's name was Alfredo, and he had this condition. And for some reason, he was the butt joke of the whole barrio. Everybody picked on him. Everybody called him names. And for some reason, the adults were just as guilty of the atrocity, because when the kids picked on Alfredo, nobody would say anything. Nobody would whack the kid's butt and say, knock it off. So Alfredo had to stop going to school because he couldn't take it anymore. And until to this day, he never went to high school, he didn't even graduate elementary school. I think his highest grade was either 4th or 5th grade. That's how bad it was. And there was something about Alfredo that was kind of, I don't know how do you. Alfredo he wouldn't lash out. He would end up crying, or he wouldn't fight back. And I think he had the most amazing capacity to forgive people. And for some reason, I don't know why, Alfredo always looked at me as a friend, as someone he really liked. And for the life of me, I until today I can't understand it, because I was one of those kids that picked on him. I was one of those horrific kids that called him names. And I think I did it because everybody else was doing it. I'm not excusing myself. If I could diagnose myself, if anything else, I have a tendency to be easily swayed by many people. if whatever's trending, I would get into the act regardless of what it was. And I think I did that. I didn't hate him. I did not dislike him. I was being a kid, being a spoiled, rotten kid. So anyway, as I said, Alfredo quit school. Sometime later, maybe a couple years later, Alfredo got the gift of having his birth defect fixed. But Alfredo couldn't really talk properly because he had one of the severest conditions as anyone seen until today. It would, if you're not familiar with it, if you don't hang around with him all the time, you would have a hard time understanding him. Not long after he had his condition reversed or fixed, in 1979, my dad and I, my brother, my half-sister, my stepbrother, and my stepmom migrated here to the United States. And in the early 1983, my dad decided to pack up and go home. And that's when I met Alfredo again. And all the time that I was here, the realization of the horrific thing that I did to Alfredo started to really sink in with me, and I was crippled in shame, guilt, and there was only, as badly as I wanted to go home back in the island, I did not want to see Alfredo because I was just so ashamed of that. But eventually, I had to go home. And that's when I met Alfredo. He was all grown up. I think Alfredo was about a year, 2 years older than we were. And when I met him, I was so frozen in fear and shame that I really didn't want to look at him. I didn't want to be near him because, well, for one thing, he probably could have kicked my butt all over the block. He was one of those kids that were solid and husky and very strong. That was one of it too. So anyway, I met Alfredo in the barrio in the early 1984, and for some reason that I could not understand, the first time he saw me, he hugged me. told me he missed me, told me that, you know, I'm all grown up and he's all grown up. And I couldn't understand how he could treat me that way. As if somebody kicked me in the stomach. You know, there's a Bible, there's a verse in the Bible that says, I'm paraphrasing now, okay? It's been a while. If you want to get even to your enemies, forgive them. Put a whole basket full of charcoal over their head. It's a metaphor of, let's just stick with forgive them. I'm sure somebody out there will post that Bible verse somewhere. And that's what Alfredo did. He forgave me and made me realize what a dope, what a jackass I was as a kid. And that be a lesson to me that, you know, as a little kid, I was not a violent one. I always somewhat considered myself to be respectful, kind. So I thought. And how far I was from the truth of what I thought I was. Until to this day, I don't understand how Alfredo can be so gracious. Do you know what? This was 19 years ago. Alfredo got married. Actually, he got married a lot longer than that. Got married, got, I don't know, a whole bunch of kids. Went up to the highest peak of Camiguin Island, where it's nice, cool, and the soil is known to be very fertile and good for farming. And he became a farmer. He planted vegetables. And every time I go home to the island when I went back to the Philippines after living here, I permanently lived in the city of Cagayan de Oro. I finished high school there. I just lived there. At the time, there was nothing to do, really nothing much to do in the barrio. And so, but once in a while, I would get so sick and tired of city life, and I would miss going home. And I would go home for the weekend, a week, 2 weeks. And every time I went home at that time, Alfredo was always there in the village. He would always greet me with a big hug, shake my hand. And you know, one thing too is his father was one of the successful net fishermen in the barrio. He had this big boat, native boat, and he had this fishing net specializing in this one particular species of fish that we call caballas. And for some reason, that's the part of what I said earlier, is that when people would see the fish would jump up and down, a whole school of fish would jump up and down in the ocean, people would ring the bell. It was his dad's fishing boat, fishing net, that we went with. And of course, Solito and Alfredo were the children of the owner. An elderly man called Soriaco Aban. And so every time they went fishing, Alfredo would always give me 2 or 3 fish to bring home, or so we could eat it raw right there. I don't know why. What he saw in me, I don't know why that he liked me. Don't really understand it. I think that's the very core definition of grace, right? He gave me his favor without me earning it. A favor I could have never earned. One time I went back to the island. I think I was already living here in the United States from 1991. I made it a point to go home almost every year. One time I came home and his dad was bedridden, and he was about to go. And I remember I had a big bottle of Tylenol. And he asked me if I had any medicine that I could give him. So I give him a couple of dozen of Tylenols. I don't know what good it did. And when I left the barrio to go back here, then that's when he passed away. And as I said, this Alfredo is one of the biggest shame, regret in my life, that it just every time that memory comes back around, it would hit me, and I would end up, my hand would crawl, roll into a fist of anger and shame and guilt. And I don't know, I haven't really thought about him that much, but for some reason this week he just popped up in my mind again. I hope I get to see my friend. And I think the last time that I saw him, I didn't really fully comprehend the magnitude of my atrocity towards him. I had some ideas, but now that I am a lot older, I think I just want to drop in front of his face and I asked him this time to forgive me. I miss my friend. I hope I could see him again. Anyway, thanks for listening, everybody. Welcome to Washington Courthouse, Ohio. Have a good and godly day. Peace.